In this presentation, we're going to be looking at the samskaras as particular examples of rites of passage, but I'm also going to be looking at examples from traditions other than Hinduism in this presentation. So we note that all human societies have what Van Gennep calls rites of passage, and they're meant to move people through transitions to different stages of development along a kind of biological timeline, and that is why we find them in every known culture. So here Van Gennep says it best: birth, puberty, marriage, and death are in all cultures marked by ceremonies which may differ in detail but are universal in function. And we're going to look at a number of the rituals surrounding these various rites of passage and discuss what they're meant to be doing. So the base elements of a samskara are fire, water, prayers and blessings, sacrifice, direction, so the use of directions, the way the body is seated or the way it's facing, and time. So these all are present in each samskara. So I just wanted to point out that regardless of the religious tradition you're looking at, that this creates a kind of grammar, and it's like learning a language. Once you start to learn the pieces, you start to be able to put it together. So for instance, I talked about this right at the beginning of the course. Color symbolism will be true throughout. So if it's Christian, the color white will probably be occurring. Also black when we see the funeral rituals. In Hinduism, red, white are very common colors to see. In Islam, green is a very common color that's used. So all of the rites of passage will have these elements and pieces that are part of how they function. So we have here a photograph of a Hindu sacred fire, in this case at a wedding. And so as I've been illustrating throughout, the fire is always present at a samskara. It's understood as being the witness that seals the event, that makes it official. So for these very important rites of passage, there has to be, in the Hindu tradition, a fire present. So unsurprisingly, birth rituals are ubiquitous across culture. Of course, this is an event that's very important to a number of people. And so when a birth occurs in a family, the family and community are welcoming a new person. This also, however, changes the status of all the people in that sort of family grouping. So the woman becomes a mother, the man becomes a father, people become aunts and uncles, grandparents, and so on. So it's a profound event for a whole family and changes their status. And so if we just look at the mother-child dyad, we know that it's absolutely essential that the woman makes this transition, not just physically, but also mentally into motherhood, so that she's psychologically becomes a mother. So it's unsurprising that rituals cluster around birth as a way to move all the people involved into this role, because really, if we look at history, this is the most important for the human race to continue. People have to be fulfilling the function of parents and the people that support parents. Here we have a picture of a little girl undergoing the Namkarana ceremony of Hinduism, and this would be happening a few months after her birth. Here you can see the mother has already gone through a series of rituals and has actually spent up to 40 days in a situation of, it's called impurity, but really when you look at it, what happens is the family moves in and she doesn't have to cook, she doesn't have to clean, the focus is on her and this newborn child. So she has over a month to make that transition. There's particularly focus put on the first birth, which is typical in all cultures because that's the most profound change. It gets a little easier after each one, at least it's a known territory. So here the child is being named, so there's a whole ceremony. So we see the priest is holding out the fire, parent is holding her hands out to the fire. So again, the use of fire in all the samskaras and all these rites of passage. And again, as I keep saying throughout, we have to pay close attention to the clothes and the ornament actually. So she's wearing her best her best outfit for this ritual as she's given her name. Here we have a typical Christian baptism taking place, and you can see the look of amazement on the face of the child looking at the parent like, what's happening? So typically this is a baptismal font that's kept specifically for this practice in most churches. Often the water being used is blessed or holy water. In some cases it may even be brought from the River Jordan in Israel, depending on the church. And so on the left is the priest baptizing the child. So you can see a kind of parallel here with the Namkarana, very similar structure that, however, the important element being water instead of fire here. So in Christianity, that water is associated with rebirth that goes right back to the ritual that St. John the Baptist did with Jesus. And so the child is being welcomed into the Christian community. And so again, looking at the clothing, wearing white, color of purity in the Christian tradition. And often these outfits are passed down in families and they're kept as kind of sacred objects. They're only worn on this one occasion, or they're bought specially and they're very elaborate. So again, the clothing marking out the importance of the ceremony, and also the people participating in the ceremony are dressed up. The priest is obviously wearing priestly garb, but the family is also dressed up in their best clothing. And anybody who's been to a baptism knows that people play a variety of roles. So there's godparents, and it's interesting to think of the idea of godparents and what that is meant to do. You can see there's kind of a creation of several lines of defense that cluster around supporting the child. So if anything goes wrong with the parents, there's two other adults to step in and also protect that child. Here we see a picture of a Brit Milah, which is the first ritual for children in the Jewish tradition, at least for boys. It's the circumcision. And so this is a vital ritual for any Jewish male. It goes right back to the story of Abraham in the Hebrew Bible. And so it's surrounded by ritual if somebody is a practicing Jewish person. And so it partakes of a similar structure to all the other initiation rituals we've seen, birth rituals, of welcoming that child into the larger community. So this idea that you're not just an individual, you're part of a family, and then you're part of a religious community. Initiation rituals are also important rites of passage. I won't spend a lot of time on these because I talk about it quite a bit in the written part of the lecture, but these are typical in religious life, but also in secular life, that a variety of rituals are used to change somebody's status and bring them into a certain group. I talk quite a bit about the Upanayana ceremony in the written lecture, so I won't go into a lot of detail here, but here we have a picture of a boy who has successfully gone through all the rituals, and I talk about the idea that his head is shaved as a symbol of rebirth. You can see he's wearing white. He's now wearing a sacred thread that symbolizes his rebirth into a new stage of life, and he's reading from the Vedas, the sacred texts in Sanskrit. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the idea of the liminal state that Van Gennep talks about. So he talks about the rites of separation, which removes the person from their former life. So in the case of the Upanayana, the boy is taken ritually from the lap of the mother. So this is the idea that he's being removed from the world of women, taken into the world of men. And once he's separated from that old identity, he's in what Van Gennep calls a liminal state. And so this is where he or she is betwixt and between roles. So in traditional culture, this is considered to be a very dangerous position. You're very vulnerable because you're neither one thing nor the other. So there's a lot of rituals of protection around that period. It's almost the idea of when a butterfly is in the cocoon stage. They've liquefied. They're not a caterpillar anymore. They're not a butterfly. They're in between. So there's a lot of rituals around making sure that for that period the person is safe and protected, and then they move into their next identity. Here we have a picture of a Jewish girl undergoing her bat mitzvah. So this is parallel to the ritual for boys called the bar mitzvah. So she's reading from the Torah publicly in the synagogue for the first time. So this is interesting because the idea of a bat mitzvah is fairly recent. It's been, I would say, since the 1970s. And I actually met a Jewish woman who had a bat mitzvah in her 50s because it wasn't permitted when she was a girl. So she did it much later in life. But traditionally, obviously, it would be done at the age of 13 when it's kind of a puberty ritual and a movement towards adulthood. And so we see again, if you were parsing this image, she's surrounded by her parents who are obviously very, very happy. And so you can see that they're actually even physically supporting her as she moves into this new status as a young adult. So as you will know, marriage rituals are found in most of the world's cultures, all of them that I know of anyway. And so it's been interesting to see the controversy around gay marriage and how that has galvanized controversy. So we can see from this that rites of passage, there's no doubt about it, tend to be conservative in nature. They're kind of attempting to keep things the same over time. So any changes within these rituals, usually cause some kind of a struggle, and often, even if it's a traditional ceremony, there's often arguments about how the ritual is done. So we can see we're having a kind of society-wide argument about this, although it's been resolved in Canada. It's been legal for a long time now. So it's interesting to see here that these women have chosen both to wear the traditional white wedding dress, and so this looks like City Hall to me, but they're wearing traditional wedding gowns. So kind of an interesting juxtaposition of a less traditional ceremony, but using the traditional garments. And I think I would read that as saying that they're saying that this ritual is just as traditional as if it were a man and a woman. Okay, let's get the party started. So again, if I were an anthropologist from another country, what would I make of this? Even as a Canadian, I often don't know what to make of some of this. But anyway, I think we can analyze it. It's not that hard. So the idea of the hen party, the bachelorette party, I always enjoy taking this up with the class, so this is hard to do with slides. But so I want you to think about what's going on here. So this is very much part of the pre-wedding ritual in North American culture, and in British too. Their hen parties are notorious. They've actually been banned in certain countries because they're so rowdy. So we see here again, they're all dressed in the same color. And this idea, there's a kind of rowdy aspect to the hen party because behind it is the idea that this stage of your life is over, where you're, going out on the town all the time, drinking and partying and so on. And so the woman and the man are having their last hurrah, often with a great deal of drinking involved. I have to say I really have a different view of bridal showers than I did when I was younger. When I was younger, I used to just suffer through them. But I do think when we look at it, there's a really practical aspect to the bridal shower. So obviously it's celebratory, there's food, there's drink, there's presents. And so this idea that the community comes together to support the woman as she's becoming a bride. So again, that idea that it's not just about the individual, it's the whole community coming in, family and community, to support this woman as she makes the transition. And the gifts are very interesting. There's been a number of works done on the whole idea of the gift economy and what it denotes. And so we can see, even if we just look really functionally, that particularly if this is a young couple that's marrying, as some of you will know, setting up a household is extremely expensive. So bridal showers in whatever form often are about helping the young couple set up their household. So it often involves gifts that are very practical. In some cultures that I know of, people pin money to the bride, and in some you actually get enough money to make a down payment on a house. So you can see that these rituals, again, are all about the community and family supporting the couple as they move into this next stage of life. So this is taken from the marriage ceremony itself in Hinduism. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail as it's covered in your lecture and in the video that I've attached to this section of the course. But I just want to look at this. This is taken from the actual marriage ceremony, and it's being stated by the father. So the father is very important here. This is a patriarchal society, and so this idea of giving away of the bride is found in patriarchal societies. He's giving the woman to a different man. So this girl being adorned according to my ability, wearing ivory bangles and no metal, having tied the madana fruit, giving fruits, making provision for her with gold according to my power, and possessing the features described in the scriptures, and for the purpose of begetting children, I bestow such a bride on the bridegroom who resembles Prajapati. So this idea of the woman being adorned, and you'll see in the video how important that is. Lots of jewelry, lots of very elaborate costuming going on. And so, and a number of different things are attached to her for good luck, for auspiciousness. And that's also directly related to the idea of fertility. And so there's obviously a recognition here that the marriage is about having children. And so, again, we see that this isn't about the individuals per se. This is about the continuation of the family line, and also likening the bridegroom to the god Prajapati here. So for this period of time, the bride and groom are kind of like a god and a goddess. So here we have the kind of ultimate moment in the Hindu ceremony where it's absolutely official. So this is when the bride and bridegroom walk around the fire 7 times. And so again, there's the sacred fire and the number 7 being auspicious, and they're reciting various things as they walk around the fire. You can see the Brahmin priest there reciting. And so once they've taken these 7 steps, they're officially married. Here we see an image of Lord Yama, the god of the dead in the Hindu tradition. And so I want to turn now to looking at funeral rituals. So we talked about the idea that Van Gennep raises that these rites of passage take the person from birth to death. And that's a very important aspect, that all the important transition points of life are covered by these rituals. I just wanted to offer a few different images from different parts of the globe in terms of funeral customs, and probably unsurprisingly at this point, there's always sort of certain similarities. And so here again, we have the procession, so the walking together, so that element of solidarity in the community. And this is particularly important in a funeral ritual, that the community rallies to support the family who has undergone this loss. So you can see this is a small Irish village, so it's everybody. And even the dogs are there. And so you see the men, this is clearly Christian ritual. So the men are carrying the coffin on their shoulders. This would be the traditional way of doing it. Everybody's dressed in black, which is the typical Christian color of mourning. And they're processing with the body to the graveyard. Here we're looking at an African funeral procession, and I would wager it's also Christian. There's a large Christian community in Africa, as well as Muslim and indigenous. So you can see that, again, they're holding the body on their shoulders, and the whole community has come out, children, everybody, to accompany the body to its final resting place. This does vary. In some cultures and regions of the world, women aren't permitted to participate, or the children aren't permitted to participate. But in this case, you can see the close relations of the entire community here. In this picture, we see a Hindu funeral. They're carrying the body right through the streets of the town. And again, the men are carrying the body, and the body is decorated with flowers. There's no coffin in this case, and they're taking the body to be cremated. And it's interesting to see in all these examples the way in which we can see how this ritual works against the denial of death. And I've often raised this discussion of the open casket. Some people are appalled by the idea of an open casket, but I think from the point of view of psychology, you would say that this is a way of making it real for people, because we know that people can go into a kind of state of denial around death, particularly for the family members. It's just such an unreal experience. So you can see with all these examples when the body is being carried that it's very concretely clear, so that the community is helping the family deal with this fact. So many of you will be familiar with this. This would be typical of a Christian burial. So they're at the cemetery. And if we just look at it, sort of analyzing it, it's interesting to look, okay, again, at the clothing. Everybody's in very formal, somber clothing, in this case, black clothing. Even their body posture is very formal and somber. And so this is the point at which the body is buried, which is often a very emotional moment for families. So you can kind of see these people acting as a kind of honor guard for the family. So in this part of the funeral where the coffin is lowered into the ground, it's very common for people to throw certain items into the grave. Here we're seeing flowers. More traditionally, it would be soil. It would be part of the actual ritual from the Bible, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So linking it back to scripture, linking it back to Christian beliefs about, the raising of the dead at the end of times and so on. But this depends on if the family is religious or not. So it will vary. But again, this part of the ritual is often very emotional for the family because it's such a kind of final marker of the death of the person. Here we have the cremation fire in Hinduism. So again, that element of fire that's always present at all the samskaras. So of course, this is the final samskara. It's often common in Hinduism for only men to participate in this part of the ritual. And so the idea of fire as also purifying and releasing the soul is part of the idea in the Hindu tradition.